On today's podcast, we are joined by Jamie Sussel Turner, who is a professional coach, speaker, and award-winning author of Less Stress Business, a guide for hiring, coaching, and leading great employees. She's been featured in the New York Times, received an Athena Leadership nomination, and served as a speaker curator for TEDx Asbury Park, the largest TEDx on the East Coast. Before becoming a professional coach, Jamie served as a public school educator, including 12 years as a school principal. She holds master's degrees in both educational leadership and elementary education, and is credentialed coach by the International Coach Federation, Coaching for Results Global Inc., and the Institute for Social and Emotional Intelligence. She's also a certified facilitator of Fierce Conversations. Today we discuss less stress life, how to become less stressed, become aware for a greater calm, and how to scrutinize your personal stresses every day and turn them into a better, more functionized life. Without further ado, we are very happy to have Jamie Sussel Turner on the Functionized podcast. And we're live at the Functionized podcast with our special guest of Less Stress Life, Jamie Sussel Turner. Hi, Jamie.
And so I hate to correct you right out of the gate. I should have told you before, Sussel rhymes with muscle, which is a good word for you guys.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. So, you say tomato, I say tomato.
No, I don't. I get your point.
Yeah, I should get the names. Muscles. So
actually, Muscles Sussel was my nickname at summer camp.
I love it.
Very nice.
Muscles Sussel.
The swimmer muscles.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, by the way, for sending your book. Greatly appreciate it. And in going through it, you started at the beginning talking about a hummingbird experience, where you finally, for the first time, it seems, kind of took a look at life instead of just running through with your head cut off. So what was kind of the aha? Did you know that you needed to start appreciating things, or it was just hummingbird? Wow, look at that.
No, I knew I needed to start appreciating things before that hummingbird moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, as with many people, it started with a health crisis.
Right.
So in 2001, when I was diagnosed for the first time with cancer, it was early stage breast cancer, and I was a crazed school principal. And notice the subtitle of my book is how I went from crazed to calm. I want to be clear, I wasn't crazy. I was crazed. I was, overworking, overwhelmed, thinking I was doing the best job I possibly could do, but I was doing too much of everything. Didn't know how to delegate. I just took everything on myself. And so it was after that, or during that illness, that I started to realize I needed to appreciate life in a new way. But that hummingbird moment was one of the first times I really did.
So you're a school principal, and was there any time that you were working as a principal you said, this is just too much, I can't get my head above water, or were you just kind of oblivious to it?
Actually, I kind of thrived on it.
Okay.
I was one of those workaholics. I'm no longer that person, but I liked putting all my energy and time into what I was doing. I was on a mission to really make my school, the most amazing school possible. And I lost sight of my life in the process, which is the problem with being a workaholic.
Right.
I stopped eating as healthy as I was before that job. I've been an avid workout person my whole life. I was an athlete in high school, and I just kind of couldn't seem to get to the gym or get to do a run or a walk or anything. except on the weekends, which was the first time in my life that had ever happened. I kind of let all of my good habits and routines fall by the wayside and let this job overtake me. And I was happy about it at the time. You know, it wasn't until getting hit with an illness that I realized maybe not the best choice.
Right.
You know?
And that's very typical in the life that we live right now, because everyone is full steam ahead.
Exactly.
And self-care is the one thing that gets put on that back burner every single time. You know, so without self-care, without taking care of you, it's really hard to keep up the energy demands, you know,
Right.
of what obviously being a school principal, you know, you would have.
Exactly. It's so true. There's a little chapter in my book that's titled Self-Care is Not Selfish.
And I have made several comments to that. It is absolutely not selfish.
Right.
You need it.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more.
And stress is all around us. I mean, from the computer monitor, I'm pointing the computer monitor on a podcast so nobody can see me pointing to it. Telephones just being bombarded with literally everything. And then, as you're saying, you're thriving on work.
Right.
And I see this happen daily. I mean, individuals will get out of high school and get into the real world, or they go to college, and then congratulations, you have your diploma, you're now unemployed, you get a job, and that becomes the most important thing in the world, and your entire lifestyle changes, and at no time is there any mindfulness of backing off and saying, okay, well, let's slow down a little bit.
Right.
And it does seem like so oftentimes cancer kind of hit you.
Yeah, big wake-up call there. And, you know, I think sometimes people, and I would put my prior self in this category, kind of wear stress as a badge of honor, showing how important and how busy we are, and we think that's a good thing. And we don't realize the damage that it's doing both to our health, our well-being, our relationships, every aspect of our life, when stress kind of overtakes us instead of us having a handle on our stress, which is what I try and help people do with my book and also my coaching.
Now, in your experience, what do you think is the underlying cause of why people kind of fill themselves up with so many things, if you would, that cause the stress?
Well, people feel uncomfortable with stillness and quiet. It takes some practice in our world today to learn how to be quiet and how to be still and how to be silent. I was like that, so I put myself in that category also. Learning, you know, practicing yoga really helped me with that. And meditation can help with that. There are lots of different things that we can do, but we're raised in this frantic and frenetic environment, you know, that we're bombarded with information constantly. Even just coming here today, I had some talk radio on, and then I thought, I don't need all this information. This is too much. Let me put on some chill music on my way here. And so we're not always in touch with that. You know, some people in their houses have the TV on or the radio on constantly.
Yes.
Because they're just not comfortable with being inside their own head.
Yeah,
And we have to learn that.
Kind of funny you mention that because I mean, my mom was the same way. Granted, I'm one of 5 kids, so she was used to always hearing chatter and everything. But she actually, now that you know the nest is empty, so to speak, she's had a lot of. She plays music and TV constantly. She doesn't listen to any of it, but she's like she gets freaked out with her terms,
Right.
with it being too silent. Cause she doesn't. I don't know. She gets uncomfortable anymore. She got so used to always hearing, you know, kids constantly, all the noises and problems that causes.
That's a great example. But so we have to practice and learn how to be still and learn how to have some quiet and peace and calm and choose it. You know, I love to say one of my favorite expressions since I've been talking about my book since it came out in January is your stress is your choice. So it's a choice to choose less stress. It's a choice to choose calm and peace. And we all can get there, but it's learning how to do that.
And that's something I was going to ask you on how to get through.
Yeah.
I have one person exactly in mind where I've said, all right, you need to take even just 5 minutes in the day and just be mindful, relax, do nothing. Just don't even have thoughts, just be. And the response I get back is, Jim, I don't have the time for that. What might you tell somebody that says that exact thing? Jamie, I just don't have time for that. I don't have time for 5 minutes.
Well, I would say it's a choice. So what are you choosing in your life that you might want to say, maybe that's not as important, and it's prioritizing. If I would say that person being still isn't important to them like it is to you. They haven't been sold on why that would matter to them to find those 5 minutes, as much as you've probably tried to help them get that. So, it's a choice, and we're choosing other things. There's definitely time. That's just an excuse when someone says there isn't time. That's a cop-out. That's an excuse.
Oh, yeah.
You can imagine all the 5 minutes that person wastes throughout the day doing all kinds of things that aren't important. So we take time for what we think is important.
Well, that's exactly it. It is what is important that we're finding time for, and if that time is wasteful, playing on Instagram or Facebook those are pretty much the two biggies, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. So many, things, not to mention what there is that we can watch on television or streaming or, the world is just bombarding us with all of those ways to waste time these days.
And it's with that extra time that someone could actually obviously get farther in their goals than they actually are.
Right.
Because, they'd be using that time more efficiently.
Which is why, as a coach, I'm really passionate about how I help my clients with this, because someone needs, and I'm sure you all provide this here too for your clients, needs someone to support them in a step-by-step way to maybe let's practice those 5 minutes together to give them the experience of it.
Right.
Before gradually they'll be able to do it on their own.
It's all about creating the action steps, and the accountability, and that's what
exactly.
Being a coach, you understand how important that is. That people don't necessarily know how to get out of their own way and need that guiding hand, which you provide, and you've gotten some excellent acronyms in your book, to help people learn how to de-stress.
Right.
And I think that it was really great.
Oh, thank you.
Did you find writing that book was a way for you to relieve stress?
Well, it was because of what I did, the challenge I gave myself. So in the book, I describe how I became a stress detective. And for 1 year in 2017, I think my approach to stress is different than the typical approaches out there, because rather than avoiding stress and meditating and being quiet, all of that, which is good, my approach is a little bit different because it was to focus on my stress. So every single day for 1 year, I looked for a moment of stress. And when I was in that moment of stress, right in the midst of it, I asked myself how I could think differently or behave differently to feel calmer. And so I wrote a journal, I journaled about it every day. And so, yes, as the year went on, I gradually became calmer. It was amazing. I would say 3 months in was when I kind of hit the peak point where I saw a dramatic change in my being and how I was. And by the end of the year, I didn't even need to write every day because it was automatic. And I still do that every single day. It's just ingrained in me now to look for a moment of stress.
That's awesome.
That's an interesting approach. It's kind of like the directly take it head on as opposed to try to ignore the problems. You're right. I haven't heard that too many times from people look for it.
Yeah, no, that's what I think makes my book unique.
Realize what it is and pass on from it.
Yeah. So it's because one of the first problems is we don't spot our stress. We don't even realize sometimes when we're stressed. We're not even paying attention. We're so caught up in everything. We're not even noticing. Like
too busy
for me,
to be stressed.
Yeah, it's true. For me, it was when I was driving home from work when I was a principal. I would be gripping the steering wheel and kind of holding my breath. I wasn't taking deep breaths.
Oh no.
Yoga at that time helped me become more aware of my breathing. I started a yoga practice, but still I notice sometimes when I'm driving, I've had a couple of bad car accidents, so driving can be stressful for me. And I've noticed the first sign is I start gripping the steering wheel. And so I spot that stress, and I have now some strategies on how to deal with it.
So key is the strategies, because as I said, people don't necessarily, as you mentioned, know that they are stressed, and then to figure out and be like, wait a second, okay, I'm tensing, and we were talking a little bit before we started the show on biofeedback and how you had that kind of aha moment, that you could see how your body was responding under stress. And that you were able to use your coping skills, to get out of that. And I think that's a big component to people right now, that they just don't have the coping skills.
Right.
to get themselves out of those stressful states.
Yeah, they're not even paying attention to it or even making an effort.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think people realize it's not that hard when you
Right.
start to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
They use the quote that I like because it has to do with surfing. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And that resonated just because, well, I like to surf.
I didn't know that about you.
Now
Okay.
you do, and now everyone else does.
Yeah.
I think not many people younger than me knew that.
Oh.
But in that, a lot of it has to do with practices of lifestyle. And when you're talking about spotting and recognizing. Now, individuals are stressed, and they may go through days knowing they're stressed, but they're not even taught yet how to spot and be aware. What tips might you have for somebody to start identifying the different key triggers and stressors?
So in the book, I do have a list of the 10 most common
Yes, you do.
triggers. It's in the resource section in the back of the book. And I think the first thing is to just notice in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one way, is noticing, if you're holding your breath, if your body feels tense, you get a pain in your neck, that's where it goes for me, or in your back, or your body feels tense in some way, is to ask yourself, what's going on here? Is there some stress that's causing this? I think the second area is in your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So our thinking very often is what triggers our stress. So for me, one of the things I learned in my year of being a stress detective was that time was one of my biggest sources of stress, and it is for many people. And I would be driving someplace and feel like I was going to be late.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say to myself was, oh my gosh, you're going to be late. Oh no, it's going to be terrible. Oh no, they're going to be unhappy with you. And I was giving myself all of these thoughts. It was only making me more stressed and anxious. So what I've learned to do is to shift my thinking in those stressful moments to something different. Like, it's okay if you're late. You're usually on time. They're not going to mind if you're late. You won't miss too much. Someone will fill you in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I now I think of it more like an upward spiral of my thinking instead of the downward spiral of thinking that would get me more stressed in the past.
You
So
broke that negative feedback loop.
yes,
what you
exactly.
did.
Exactly.
Forming new neural pathways, it's...
And when we catch ourselves, the first thing though is to notice that that's what we're doing with our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I tell a little story in the book about driving with my husband, and we hit this, he was driving, I was the passenger, and we hit this torrential downpour at 6:30 in the morning. It's pitch black. There's no lights on the road. These tractor trailers are zooming past us, and I was on the edge of a panic attack. I've only had a panic attack once before in my life, and I could feel myself getting there and being so anxious. But luckily I was being a stress detective. So here I was at 6:30 in the morning. I found my stress moment for the day already and saw how anxious I was by gripping this, the door handle, and I just shifted my thinking from, oh no, we're going to have an accident, to I stopped myself and asked how I could think differently. And what I came to was, Wayne is the best driver I know. I've been with him 20 years. He's never had an accident. He's driving as carefully as he can. The other people on the road are driving as carefully as they can too, because they know how dangerous this is. And the sun will come up soon, and pretty soon the rain will let up. And I just talked myself down from that moment.
That takes a lot to do. Oh my goodness.
Geez.
Right?
A lot of times, just think the happy thoughts. Crap, where to go?
I don't really think it's that hard once you realize
It's
you
a
have that
practice like
choice.
everything else. Yeah.
It's knowing that you have the choice to think differently. People don't realize, they just figure, my mind is just what my mind is. I can't change it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm here to say we can.
Mm-hmm.
By recognizing that first thing is to spot your stress is the first step in my method. And so I spotted my stress that day and asked myself, whoa, how can I think differently? Because this is not working.
Right.
Thinking like this.
Now, you also talk about being good enough versus a perfectionist, which, again, resonated. I remember it was my freshman year at the University of Tampa and in undergrad, and I wanted all A's. I was going to go in, I was going to rock it as a freshman, and the day was the last day to drop ad. There was 2 classes I dropped, I was getting B's. So I dropped those classes so I could have A's, And that was pretty dumb.
Well,
Because
why was it dumb?
because with those B's, it still would have me on a honor roll type list, and at the end of the day, no one is actually looking, are you graduating with all A's? Nobody has ever asked me, did you get all A's in chiropractic school?
Right.
I'll tell you I didn't. But I'll tell you I passed every single requirement going.
Yes.
When do you ever walk into the doctor's office and say, what were your grades back in medical school? It's not asked. So
Right.
I'm sure you've come across so many people that are that perfectionist but don't actually ever finish something at times because they keep on pursuing perfection as opposed to
Right.
saying, okay, this is pretty darn good. Do the party planning. Yep, this is going to be a good party. It's not going to be picture perfect because there is no picture perfect, is there?
I've actually banned the word perfect from my vocabulary.
It's a stress word, huh?
I don't use it anymore. I catch myself occasionally. You know, like if someone says, oh, let's meet on Friday, I want to say, okay, that's perfect. I just say, oh, that's great. Friday's great. I don't even use the word perfect. Perfect does not exist. There's no such thing as perfect. And I was the perfectionist. You know, I'm a recovering perfectionist is what I call myself. And so that's why the whole notion of good enough and to know when good enough is okay, I can get myself crazed over trying to make things perfect. And that's been a big area of growth for me to not fall into that trap any longer.
Of course.
It's a hard thing to break.
Yes.
It's a very hard cycle to get yourself out of.
Right.
I've been there.
Yeah.
I think any high achiever has been there at some point.
I think you're right. And it has diminishing returns because we can be working so much on the straight A's and people get burned out. Like, you know, I know you have young children, but I've seen that as an educator my whole life, as a former school principal, students who were so much high achievers, they get to college and they burn out, or in their first job they burn out. You know, it just gets to be too much.
Have you found that your book, which is it's great, you know, and it's geared, I think, you know, more towards the adult population, but have you found a way to reach like that youth, that, you know, pre-adolescent, like transition from high school to college, you know, any kind of tips for them, because that's a very big stressful you know, experience to go into to help them have coping skills?
So I don't actively work with that population right now, but I am a mother and I raised 2 sons and I'm a grandmother and have 5 grandchildren. So
You've got experience.
In that realm, I have a lot of experience, and as a school principal, I had a lot of experience, and I would help parents with a lot of those issues. It's not part of my current practice, but I think even as parents, if the parents have the thinking that they can get from my book, that can be helpful, because then they can use these strategies and teach them to their children.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We live in a...
Not perfect.
Yeah, not perfect.
There you go, see?
Good enough.
Wonderful.
But we work in an environment here where individuals are looking to have more longevity and revitalize themselves, if you would. And there's kind of twofold, it seems, on that. One is, I'm stressed out. Oh my goodness, I hit 40. I hit 50. Oh my goodness, I'm 60. Versus just feeling younger and being more vibrant and having full of energy throughout the day. Where do you find the difference of stressing over your age versus anti-aging kind of comes into play?
Well, as the oldest person in the room right now, I love that question. And I think I don't think about the number of my age. I'm 67. I don't go around thinking, oh my gosh, I'm 67. I never have thought about age in that way. I want to be as vital as I can be, no matter what the number says. It's just a number. It's kind of the way I feel about the scale also. It's a similar thing, you know.
Yep.
Whatever the number is on the scale is what the number is on the scale. And it's more how I feel about my body, being in my body, than whatever that number reflects. So, yeah, I just think it's just a number. We're just so hung up on those numbers.
So throw away the amount of candles on a cake and a scale, and
there you
we're
go.
ahead of the game right there.
Enjoy the day. Right?
Yeah.
Enjoy the cake.
I don't even weigh myself. Only when I go to the doctors do I find out how much I weigh. It's just not important. I can tell by how my clothes fit. I don't need a scale to tell me.
I wish more had that mentality.
Yeah.
I really do. So that was interesting. You talk in your book about a friend that you had. I was kind of perplexed myself, like, what gives? But
Yeah.
it seems like she reached out again.
It's one of my favorite stories in the book.
Is it? I
Because
was
it
hesitant to
has
bring
a
it up.
postscript. No, there's more that's happened since the book came out.
Okay.
So for the listeners, it's hard for them to appreciate without telling the story quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see if I can give you a quick synopsis.
Go ahead.
I had a best friend when I was between marriages. I was about in my mid-40s. She was 15 years younger, so I think she was about 30. And we did everything together. And then all of a sudden, after 5 years of this very close friendship, she just stopped returning my phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the days before email was really prevalent and, all of social media and all of that. And I called her, I left messages, please tell me what happened. I call her Felicia in the book, which is not her real name. And she just disappeared from my life. And I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, we reconnected. I found her on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
and we reconnected, and we had a Skype call, and it was as if nothing had happened. She didn't bring it up, and I didn't bring it up. We just resumed our friendship. She lives in another state now, so I still have not seen her. Well, would you know, when my book comes out, I get a message from her on Facebook saying, Jamie, I bought your book, and I can't wait to read it.
Wow.
And I think, oh no.
Stressful moment today?
Yes. I think I need to give her a heads up here. So I sent her a message back saying, I'm honored that you bought the book, but I want to let you know there's a story that's going to sound very familiar. And I hope you'll be okay with it. I had to wait 24 hours before I heard back from her.
She's skimming through quick.
And she
What
said,
you talking about?
she writes back, she said, it took me 3 seconds to find my story.
Mm.
And I was telling my boyfriend all about our friendship when he saw the book on the kitchen counter. And I told it exactly the way you told it in the book, which I was relieved to hear that was the way she remembered it also. And she said, if you want to know Felicia's point of view, I'll be happy to tell you more.
Mm.
I know.
Very
So we
nice.
had another Skype call.
Mm-hmm.
We were on Skype for 2 hours, and it wasn't, I think the first hour we were just catching up, and then we actually got to the issue. And we had the most authentic and honest conversation. And I learned more about what was going on for her at the time and how maybe I could have behaved differently in the friendship,
Mm-hmm.
because I had just become a principal when this happened. And my husband was a new person in my life, my second husband. And so she was feeling crowded out of our friendship. Our friendship had changed. And she apologized for not having the courage at the time to tell me what was going on and leaving me with this void of information. I thought I was doing the best I could have done
Right.
to include her, but maybe I could have done more had I known she was feeling
Right.
not included. And we came to just such a good understanding. And best of all, she's coming to visit in 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Very nice.
I know. So I will get to see Felicia.
Well, welcome to reunion. That's wonderful.
Yeah, so you never know when you put your thoughts out into
That's
the
right.
world,
Mm-hmm.
what can happen.
It's interesting though, because it's just, I guess, human interaction, whether they're friends, whether they're not friends, how different situations like that can arise, and I'm sure you dwelled on that for one or two moments.
It
right?
was so stressful for me. Like,
Right.
we all have relationship stress, whether it's a friendship or romantic relationship or a family relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and how we communicate. There's, chapters in the book about communication. One of my practices is about speaking your truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't do that, there's so much stress that can happen. I was left with this ambiguous loss of this friend, Felicia, and I did not understand what happened, and it was devastating to me. I valued our friendship so much. She was such an important person in my life, and I didn't know what happened,
Right.
and it was a terrible feeling. It really caused me a lot of stress.
But it worked out.
Yes, had a happy ending.
Sleep is something that a lot of individuals suffer from a lack thereof. That they're not getting that 7.6 hours. I'm so glad you gave me that research study. 7.6
know.
hours is the ideal amount of...
You gotta say,
That's
going
per day, not per
week.
week, right?
That is the one thing I do is read a lot of research studies, so
Yes, good.
pass all the good information back and forth.
But what are some of the tips that you've found that work for when you're having trouble sleeping? Most likely, lots on your mind. So how do you
Yes.
typically decompress?
So the first thing I learned, and there's a short chapter about sleep in the book, so thanks for bringing that one up.
Of course.
Yeah, I can tell you did your homework. I'm impressed. And
He's studious.
yeah, the first thing is to not stress about it, to let go of the worry that it's going to have this negative effect on you the next day. Because in my experience, it's not really the next day, it's usually the day after for me. But you can find ways to compensate for it and get more sleep and catch up a little bit, even though sleep deficits can't completely be made up. I know that, but you can try to restructure things so you can get a little bit more sleep. But the more I stress about it, the less I sleep. So the best strategy that I've used, I got from a yoga book many years ago. I can't even name the source because I don't remember. It was so long ago. But it's to count backwards from 50 using your breath. Because when we count backwards, it takes a lot of mental energy, so you cannot think about anything else while you're doing this. So basically it goes like this. You breathe in 50, exhale 49, nice and slowly. Breathe in 48, exhale 47, and very often I get to about 40 and then I get a thought creeps in and I forget where I am and I start over again. And I almost never get to 0 and I've fallen back asleep. So it keeps those thoughts out, and the breathing is really important also.
Yes.
Well, I'm a big proponent of proper breathing over here, so
Yeah.
so finding it does help quiet the mind, and I think that's great counting backwards because it helps to dissociate those other thoughts, that can be plaguing a person that's keeping them awake. So
Exactly.
that's actually really great.
That's my go-to strategy.
Yeah, that's an excellent
And
one.
then the other thing I do, if I'm not back to sleep in a half an hour, I get up out of bed. And I know there are different theories about this, and we all need to find what works for us.
Right.
My husband never gets out of bed. But I get out of bed, I go downstairs, I make a cup of herbal tea, and I try not to stay so focused on the sleeping. I just have a cup of tea, read something boring, and go back to bed. And that usually works for me too. And I just try not to, stay focused on the fact that I'm not getting sleep. I think it's different if you have a chronic sleep problem. These are not the strategies I'm talking about for someone who has a chronic sleep problem, but this is for occasional sleeplessness.
I'm sure there's times, I know plenty of times for me, I'll be laying there, eyes bug-eyed at the ceiling, saying, I know I'm tired. What gives?
Right.
I start yelling at myself, go to sleep. Come on, go to sleep.
The more you stress about it, the worse it will be.
And it doesn't happen.
Right.
So, yeah, I like your strategy there. I know one of the things that's always said not to do, especially when you're trying to go to sleep, is turn on the television.
Right.
However, I can find late night cartoons that within 5 minutes I am pretty much out. So
If
I
that
can
works
crawl back
for you,
into bed.
Right. I think you just have to find what works for you. Everybody's different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was just saying that everyone's going to be saying, Jim, you're not doing the perfect thing? What's wrong with you?
No
There's
perfect.
Gonna, there's going to be some message, yes. It is good enough. Good enough to go back
Exactly.
to sleep. So I know one thing I'm always guilty of is attaching something to an outcome. Everything I'm doing has to be almost a perfect outcome at times as well. Can you talk a little bit about the attachments to outcomes?
Right. So letting go of the outcome is really helpful
Mm-hmm.
when we're stressed, because a lot of our stress comes from trying to control things that we can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I just got back from a weekend in Canada. It was a 9-hour drive coming home yesterday, and we couldn't control the traffic.
Nope.
So it didn't help to think, oh, I want to get home by 4 o'clock, or anything like that. I just try not to think about the time when I'm in that situation. I let go of the outcome of whatever time I get home is when I'm going to get home, because I cannot control the traffic. That's out of my control. So I think when we start being attached to outcomes, it's because we're trying to control something that is not within our wheelhouse to control.
Absolutely. How many
You know.
times, Shantae, we've been driving around on the weekend or something, traffic pops up, we say we'd like to be here by such a time, you know what? We're together as a family, nowhere to go,
Right.
We get there when we get there.
Those are the words.
I like that.
Yeah.
We get there when we get there. That's a good one.
It does. I mean, you see so many people, swerving and cutting in and out, and the road rage that happens, and it's why.
I know.
Where you're rushing to stop at the next red light.
Exactly.
So if I'm going 50 and a 50, and you want to go 60, but we end up in the same spot at the same time, it really makes you wonder, where are they? What are they trying to accomplish?
I like the
what
way you think.
in their life is that important, that they're risking their safety, the safety of others, and just zoning out.
Exactly.
And it's,
Let me add one more thought to that, because by rushing to get someplace, we don't know what might happen. Maybe that person who rushed ahead of us will be in an accident because someone barrels through the intersection. So in life, we don't know what the outcome's going to be, no matter what we're putting so much value on. For example, in employment, there's a lot of stress in terms of like going for an interview if you're unemployed and you desperately want to get a certain job. Well, maybe that's not the best job for you. And maybe if you had gotten that job, you would have been miserable.
Yep.
Right? So you put so much into that outcome of getting that job instead of thinking, if this is the right job for me, then I hope I get this job, but maybe it won't be the right fit. And let's be open to all those possibilities instead of being so tightly wedded to the outcome of getting the job.
No, absolutely. Stress is obviously, it's real. It's a real thing that we actually feel. But do you find it's often that we make up a lot of stress in our own minds that's needless?
Are you speaking about yourself, Jim?
Maybe.
Your name's Felicia now.
It is.
You'll be in book 2.
It's human nature. Stress, as I say in my book, if you see something that says no stress, run, because there's no such thing as no stress. Stress keeps coming like the ocean waves, going back to that saying that you said earlier about surfing. You can't stop the waves, but the ocean is going to keep coming. Stress will keep coming.
Right.
And you can't get it to stop. But we do manufacture a lot of it by how we're thinking. And, it's like that time, going back to my example of being in the car during the rainstorm, I was manufacturing an accident. Boy, I went from, being uncomfortable to we're going to be in a terrible accident, like 0 to 60 that fast.
Yes.
So, yes, it's just being aware of what our minds are thinking and challenging ourselves and realizing that we can choose less stress.
You also brought up in your book, and I think it's a really important factor, is the negative stress and then the positive that you stress, that you mentioned, because coming from a competitive environment in athletics, there is that certain amount of stress that's needed to perform, at the optimal level, but it's finding the balance, as you clearly, pointed out, not letting that stress become the negative stress.
Yeah.
So,
not all stress is bad.
Right, exactly.
Some stress energizes our bodies to perform, which you're all about performance, so you know that. And, before something like this interview today, I don't want to have no stress because I'll be like blah and sitting there like a bump on a log. I need to come energized, right? I need to be energized a little bit for the conversation. And so a little bit of stress used in a positive way.
Right.
And there's also evidence that how we think about that stress, if we think about it, we're on the starting block for a swim race, for example, which you and I have both done, Chantel. So if you're on the starting block, you're thinking, and you feel your heartbeat, instead of thinking, oh my God, I'm stressed, it's much more helpful if we think, oh, my body is getting me ready to swim.
Here we go.
My body is energizing me right now.
I call that game time. Like when I get that, no, seriously, because I used to have, like a lot of people with, I used to have athletic performance anxiety. Because I wondered, like, what happens if I win, what happens if I lose?
Right.
And anymore, it's when I still get that little flutter, that little nervousness before events. I think it's good to.
Yes.
But I just don't, I had it not too long ago, it was like, oh, it's game time. And I just completely flipped the switch. I was wrapped up, I was ready to go.
That's great.
I wasn't pulled down from it.
Yeah, it's how you think about it. So when
That
you
took
feel
me
that
a couple
flutter,
more years than I want to admit to get over it.
right? Yeah, it's using that energy in a positive way and realizing it's your body getting you ready to perform, and that's a good thing. Instead of thinking that it's a bad thing. like same thing with kids when they're taking tests. If your children have any test anxiety, or any of the listeners experience that
We
kind
ever
of
had test
performance.
anxiety?
What? Test?
On boards.
Didn't say anything about that.
You made it through boards, you know. So.
Leave it at test, yeah.
Or, someone who's in theater or performing. We used to have little talent shows in my school when I was a principal. At lunchtime, kids did little talent shows.
Oh, nice.
It was great. And they would get on this, before they would go on stage, they were always telling me how nervous they were. And, I would say, oh, you're going to have butterflies, but they're going to fly away as soon as you start.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. When we are performing, we feel that anxiety in the beginning, but like butterflies, they fly away once we get started.
You also stop thinking about the anxiety once you start performing,
Yes.
which is a big part of what you said. Just don't think about it,
Right.
or go past it.
Yeah, think positively. Think about that it's good. It's helping to fuel you and energize you.
I don't like to admit it, but years ago, when coaching, that was actually a mistake. I would actually get athletes a little too relaxed. And, I don't want to let you down, coach. It's okay. You're not going to let me down. Everything's fine. Right. I don't care if you lose. I just wanted to get that out of their head. And they perform awful. Like all that hard work. Uh-oh.
That's funny.
Keeping that right balance
It's
is
all
where to
about
be.
the balance.
It's okay to be anxious.
Yes.
So when we think that it's not okay, that's when we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to feel stressed and anxious before a performance.
Right.
It's normal.
Yeah, and that's where the practice leading up to it carries you through. Because no matter how stressed you are,
Right.
you're going to be able to
this.
hit all the skills. And you're going to put on that performance. You're going to know your lines.
More automatic.
Exactly. That's what I used to always have the test anxiety myself was I would think, if I blank out in the middle of this test, what am I going to do? So I would just go over the stuff and over the stuff. It became such second nature that even if I blanked out, random answers are going to come, but they're the right answers.
Yeah. Right.
And it seemed to work.
Yeah. Over preparing.
Yeah, over preparing at times.
Yeah. But if that gives you confidence, I
Yes.
tend to be an over preparer also. And if that's what it takes to give you confidence, then that's important.
Backing up some couple years when you're a principal. Since you brought it up, I've got some questions for you.
Okay.
Children, then, now, and as they grow, the key word is bullying. That's been brought up a lot. And I always thought of bullying as taking a kid, pushing them in the dirt, stealing their lunch money. That is flat out mean and bullying. Peer pressure. I'm not talking to you if you don't come hang out with us. If you don't sit at this table, we're not friends anymore. And that continues through life, it seems. Where do you find is the best way to help a kid toughen themselves up for the rest of life versus being the parent, swooping in, fixing everything for them, putting your arm around them? They feel better, but it's going to happen again.
I love that question, and thank you for bringing up this topic because I'm passionate about this topic. I think the more we empower children to find their voice and speak up on their own behalf, the better they will be able to be in the world and handle these situations. Bullies pick on the weakest child. They know which child is not going to fight back. And until that child learns to speak up for themselves, they're going to continually have those problems. So there's a story in my book about bullying, and it's one of my clients who tells the story about a child of hers who was being bullied and how she got books from the library on bullying, and she thought about running to the principal or the teacher to talk about the problem, but decided she wanted to help empower her child first. And it turned out to be a very successful approach to help her child learn how to speak up to the bully. And it worked, and the bully stopped
Phenomenal.
the bullying. And it was a threat I think it was a recess threat, if I'm remembering correctly. Like, if you don't join my team, I'm not going to be your best friend anymore.
Right.
And children, they're really fickle, and our daughter's gone through different schools, and we've done, Catholic school, we've done homeschool, we've done public school, and each one, it's a very different experience, so seeing, the children evolve and the way that they approach other children, it's really interesting, so as a principal I could only imagine what you saw on the day-to-day basis, 'cause
Well,
we only get what we hear,
Yes.
secondhand. So finding, the kids that are quiet and the really studious ones, versus the ones that are outgoing, and then the ones, that just always get in trouble, right?
well,
So finding,
Yeah.
a way to approach all of those, you have to have a really great skill set for that.
well, we would teach the kids in my school the skills. I had a fabulous social worker, and she would go into classrooms and teach them. She taught about bullying and taught the difference between teasing and tattling, and we had a whole curriculum about it. And I was in the lunchroom every day as a principal. I thought that was important, and kids would come up to me and say, "Oh, Mrs. Turner, Michael said something to me and I didn't like what Michael said to me, or Michael hit me, or something happened." And I'd say, "Okay, go get Michael and come on over." And I would stand there with one child to my right and the other child to my left, and empower the child who felt victimized to speak up and let the other child know how they felt. And we taught them what are called I messages, which is nothing new. I felt when you, because, and the next time, please don't hit me again, or whatever it was. It was amazing to see first graders do this better than most adults I know. These first graders were amazing, and kids get over things so much more quickly than adults. And they would have this little conversation, and that would be the end of it. Because that child who felt victimized could speak up and find their voice and let the other person know how they wanted to be treated.
That's amazing.
It was.
That's a really great approach, yeah.
It is.
So
not just you taking it out, saying, "All right, you're in trouble now. You got
no, that
detention.
wasn't
You got
how
to
we
clean
did
the
it.
floors, whatever."
No.
I mean,
No, I have my own views about student behavior. And the other thing that I was really passionate about was when children got sent to the office, as the principal, that would happen. And I had a series of questions on a form. I would do the writing, but I would have this conversation with the child. And it went like this, what choice did you make? What was the impact of your choice? Well, I hit someone on the playground and they got hurt. What choice could you make the next time? If you didn't like what they were doing, I could talk to them. I could do all these different, what options did you have? Basically, it's similar to my less stress life approach. And, because these are my beliefs that have carried me for a lot of years. And then what's your plan for the next time you're in a similar situation? And I would fill this out after my conversation with the child, and it would go home to the parents. And I would keep a copy in my file. And I have to say that my proudest moment as a school principal was when I ran into a former student when he was a junior and in high school. And he was one of those students who spent a lot of time in my office. And we would go through this exercise, and then I would send him back to his class. And he said to me, when I run into students, I say, what's a memory you have from our school? That's always my question. And I run into them all the time. And this young man said to me, "Every time I left your office and I walked back to my classroom, I felt better about myself."
Hey.
There's nothing better a student could have ever said to me.
You glowed when you said that.
Yeah, because children aren't going to grow if we shame them and yell at them. That's not how, none of us grow that way.
Right.
And he felt understood and valued by me, and that I was helping him to make better choices. And that helped him feel better about himself. And, he had ADHD. It was hard for him to control himself on the playground.
That's amazing.
And I didn't punish him for that, because how was that going to help?
Right. So have you found that through your practices and your less stress that your resiliency has improved? You've gone through a couple traumatic illnesses.
Yes. Well, I'm in the middle of one right now. Currently I'm diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. So I've been in treatment for a year and a half. I've had 40 chemo treatments. So this is a wig.
Beautiful.
Not bad, huh?
Couldn't tell at all.
Yeah.
Never
No,
would
I
have
really
known.
didn't know.
I have about this much hair. Yeah, so, I have a life-threatening diagnosis. And this kind of goes back to part of my resilience, just like, another thing with sleeplessness is not looking at the clock. So I don't look at the clock, I don't look at my weight, I don't care about what number my age is. I don't know what my diagnosis is. I don't know the prognosis. I don't know the prognosis because it doesn't help me to know what percentage of people survive this. How many years do I have? I don't know. None of us knows.
Right.
Really.
None of us know.
None of us knows.
Get hit by a car walking outside,
Right. Exactly. So I don't approach it that way. And that's part of how I'm resilient because of how I think about it.
Yeah, the mindset is a huge component.
Some people survive with metastatic breast cancer. Some survive for a year, 5 years, 10 years, or longer. So why shouldn't I be one of the ones to survive
Absolutely.
for a long
100%.
time?
Well, it kind of goes back to what Tara
was
saying, you know, why not me, right?
Why not me?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you have parties when you do treatments?
You know, I have not done that, and I think I need to
Might be
consider
party time.
that. I know I read that in her book, and I've heard her talk about some of the things that she's done and with her daughter, and I really think I should be celebrating a little bit more. Absolutely.
You've been married for 1 or 2 years now.
Yes.
And in the book it talks about shared responsibilities and kind of rules in relationships and boundaries. One of them was sharing household chores.
Right.
That's helped a lot, by the way. I read that and I'm like, hey, we started doing that works.
We actually do that.
Right?
Yeah.
What else have you found helps relieve stress from relationships?
I was going to say other than sex. You know, I'm all about open communication and not holding on to things for too long because we build resentment when we do that. But it's tricky to know which things to talk about and which things to let go. And I find I give something a week and no more than a week. And if it's still bothering me after, you know, around a week point, I know that's something I need to talk about. So finding the time and finding the words and the right approach to really talk about how I'm feeling, but also to let some silly stuff go. So, you know, one thing I don't tell in the book, but it's like in my home, my husband's closet is behind my desk.
Okay.
Because he was very generous and gave me all the closet space in the master bedroom, which is very nice of him.
Very nice.
So my office is in the extra bedroom and his closet is behind it. And I hope he doesn't hear this podcast. He almost never closes the closet door. It's one of those sliding doors. It's right behind my chair. And I used to go into my office to go to work in the morning and just close the door and be so annoyed with him for not closing that door. And then when I was in my less stress year, that was one of my stressful moments of the day. Like, why am I so stressed at him? Why can't I just look at this a different way? I tried to get him to close the closet and it improved like a little bit. So now I actually say this out loud as I close the closet door. I say, I have a wonderful husband. And I mean it. He is amazing. I love him so much. He is amazing. So what if he doesn't close the closet door? So I've learned to let that one go. And as I close it, I just send love to him. And I don't feel resentment. I'm not saying do that and say, I love my husband. No, it won't work if you do it that way.
Husband.
You have to replace the door.
Right. So whether your spouse leaves their underwear on the floor or doesn't put the toilet seat down or whatever it is.
Wet towels in
Wet
the
towels
bed.
under the bed.
Wet towels
That's my thing.
on the bed? Okay. So sometimes after we've tried to talk about it and tried to change the other person's behavior and it doesn't change, to just accept it. And if it's our issue, like I like a really neat house and it's my issue, so I do more of the cleaning up because I know that's just my thing. I own it. But
There's
to not
usually one person that is more organized.
Particular,
Yes, if you would. And it is
right.
all about accepting the good and the bad and the little idiosyncrasies.
And not try to change the person and make them as crazy as I am about keeping a neat house. So I'll just do a little bit more because it's more important to me rather than building resentment about them for not doing it.
That's key.
Right.
That's a huge.
And there's research in marriage, a marriage researcher, John Gottman, who talks about the ratio of positive feedback to critical feedback in a marriage. And that it should be 5 to 1. 5 positive things that we say to our partner versus 1 more critical thing that kind of takes a notch out of the relationship. And when that ratio is not 5 to 1, there's trouble in the relationship. So to take a look at it in the workplace also, I've read 3 to 1 ratio, but I think aim for 5 to 1 in the workplace as well. And if we're giving so much criticism and negative feedback to someone, it's going to erode the relationship. So getting that balance right is important.
For every time you have something constructive to talk about, find 5 positive things
Yes.
first.
And not just saying like, oh, great job. It has to be specific.
I like your shirt.
So I noticed my husband, he's very polite and he's great at this. Early in our relationship, well, as I write in that chapter, we have rules. I do the laundry, he does the food shopping. We're much better doing our own thing than doing things together. But every couple is different. But I noticed whenever I would leave his laundry on the bed, he would get his laundry and he'd say, thank you so much for doing the laundry. And I really appreciated that. And it made me realize, I don't think I'm thanking him for all the things that he does. So now I make a point, he does all the cooking in our house. To not just say thank you for making dinner, but to say, wow, that was an amazing salad tonight. I love that you added, almonds tonight to the salad. That was great. So make it specific, the feedback.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of research studies out there that actually show showing gratitude does change the brain.
Completely.
And it helps you to live a happier, less stressed life. So
Yes.
that's, I think, really, really great that you and your husband share, gratitude for what the other person does.
Right.
That's really special.
And I do write about gratitude in the book too, because a gratitude practice really can help shift how we think about something and how we appreciate things in our life. And something that I do every day. I keep a gratitude journal.
Well, you talk about a lot of self-reflection. You have 10 questions in your book on that. Do you find how often do you find it's best to kind of reflect? Is it a daily thing, weekly, monthly, to kind of just do the self-check-ins or self-reflections?
I think it's different for everyone. I don't think I have a hard rule about that.
Okay.
But, I think after a stressful moment, and in part of we haven't gone through my method here, but my surf method, the last one is a reflection. So it's spot your stress. The U in surf stands for unleash your options around that stressful moment. The R is to respond in a new way. And then the F means reflection, but surf has an F in it. So the F is figure out what worked, which is basically reflecting. So now go back and you tried something new. I tried closing the closet door and saying good things about my husband. Now I look back and say, okay, did that help me? And yes, it did help me. So I continue to do that. So it's to figure out what worked, and part of that is reflecting. I don't think there's a specific time frame for it, but especially when we try something new about our stress is a good time to then step back and say, well, did that calm me down? Do I feel calmer as a result of that?
Absolutely. And other things that come up daily, we talk about news. I mean, how much more stressful can you be? 10 killed here, flipped bus over there, catastrophe over here. I mean, that adds stress, doesn't it?
Completely. Yes. And I write in the book about hurricane stress because my house was impacted by Hurricane Sandy. And we had 4 feet of water in our house. And so when it's coming up now in the next month or so, when they start doing all the hurricane news, I almost have PTSD from that. I can't hear too much of it. And the same thing with the news. I really do not want to hear about all the details. As much as my heart goes out to victims of shootings and all the horrible things that are happening in our country right now, I can't expose myself to too much of it. It robs me of my joy of today, and it causes a lot of stress. So I say get the news you need and get out. Just read the headline, know what's happening, and then that's enough.
It seems like the ironic part, everyone goes to the global news. But really, if you look at it, it's the local news that actually truly impacts your day-to-day. Most of that's just the events going on. What's coming up? Do you want to attend this event? Local light is going to be out or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, at least that's what I found is the important news.
It's
the other stuff is like a lot of entertainment, really. I mean, it's not affecting you. It's like going to the movies almost.
Right. I don't go to scary movies either. I'm not a horror movie fan because there's enough to scare me out in life. Some people find that an escape, and if you do, great. But know yourself, I think, is what I'm saying. Know yourself. Know how much news you can take before you feel stressed out. Know if a scary movie helps you or hinders you. It's just knowing yourself.
Yeah, I would always find out what the Kardashians are up to. That's the important news.
Oh.
Not
if
really,
you say
but
so.
Not really.
We actually said, all right, no more for that show. We're good.
Yeah, I've never even watched that show,
It's
actually.
Sports or Netflix, basically.
Yeah.
Sports.
If there's a game on or...
I think sports are a great outlet.
Uh-huh.
There's a thing to be said about decisions as well. Is there a better option out there? And there's certain people in this room, not looking at anybody, where the first decision made is typically the right one. And then we are looking for better options. Is that the right shirt? Is this the right color for the walls? How long were we in Home Depot for the color paint for this office here?
A while.
Yeah, like many hours. Let's stand this far back. It ended up being the first 2 colors that we found. 6 hours later, we're still there.
It was not 6 hours, but...
We're okay. Yes, dear. So, I got the last words. We're good. Yes, dear.
Yes, so we have too many options. That's why the paint was challenging, because there are so many paint options.
Mm-hmm.
And there's studies that have been done. They studied, I can't remember who did this study, but they studied jam in grocery stores where they had, I forget how many, don't quote me on this, but like 24 kinds of jam in one study. And they had people taste it, and then they saw what they bought. And then they had only 6 types of jam. And they found with the 6 types, more people bought jam. Because the 24, they're just like, okay, I don't know which one to buy, this is too many, and they just walked away without buying anything. So I think when we can limit our choices, so even with something like paint, I'm terrible with selecting paint, to just take one paint thing and pick from that, rather than all the paint charts that they have that could drive you crazy.
It adds a lot of stress, and there was actually a lot of studies on this. One was, they call it the buffet syndrome. The idea when you go to a buffet, people are a lot happier when there's actually smaller options.
Yes.
Because they're just like, oh, I want to grab this, I want to get this, and you end up with like overloading plates, or you didn't get to try something.
Yeah.
It shows a lot of people, you're generally happier with less options.
True. And there's a lot of research behind that.
Oh, plenty on
And-
several things
right.
similar to that. I didn't hear the jam one, but it's the same
Yes.
kind of theory.
Same
concept.
thing. And then I talk in the book about FOBO. You've heard of FOMO, which is fear of missing out. FOBO is fear of better options. And I can't remember the researcher who I name in the book, probably, but he's escaping me at the moment. But fear of better options. And in our world today, there are so many more options than the world used to have in the days of my parents, or even in my childhood. Just look at the number of cars they're on. My son just got a new car, and it was overwhelming, all the options there are for cars.
Yes.
We have too many options. So whatever we can do to narrow down our options can be helpful. And to realize at some point we need to make a decision, which is what I write about in the book, make a decision and don't look back. Because a lot of the stress around decision making comes from now second guessing ourselves and looking back and saying, was that a good, well, you made the decision already, but you're not going to go repaint the office. Right, but actually, I noticed the paint when I came in. I like the color. I have to say, I did. As I'm sitting here, I like the contrast against the white trim. It's very nice. Yeah.
Before we end up wrapping up, I mean, there's so many aspects of your book that our listeners are going to have to get the book in order to fully comprehend and get all the different parts of their life in order and less stressed. Are there any key points that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important one is that your stress is your choice. And if you feel like stress is overtaking you and that it's gotten out of hand in your life, my book is a great tool to help you realize that there are lots of things you can do to help lead a less stressful life. And when you make new choices to have less stress, you can have much more peace and calm in your life than you even imagined was possible. I'm so much calmer now than I ever thought I could be. It's still shocking to me how calm I am and how things that used to kind of trigger me and set me off just don't anymore. And so if you want to live a more peaceful life, it's there for you to access. And I think my book helps you learn how to do that.
I am confident it does. Absolutely. So when our listeners want to grab a copy of your book, what's the best way for them to do so?
So they can go to my website, which is lessstresscoach.com, and that would take them, there's a link to Amazon, or they can just go to Amazon and put in the title of the book, Less Stress Life but it's really hard to find it on Amazon because there's so many books about stress.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so probably going to my website would be easier.
LessStressCoach.com.
LessStressCoach.com. And it's also on the Barnes & Noble website. And for local listeners, it's at, always like to give a shout out to River Road Books in Fairhaven, a great little independent bookstore. And it's also at Barnes & Noble in Eatontown, where I've left a few signed copies of the book.
Wonderful.
Rush over to Eatontown. Where else, if they want to get in contact with you, how do they do so?
So I'd love to hear from your listeners, and my email address is very simple. It's Jamie, Jamie, at lessstresscoach.com.
Simple.
That is so simple. Jamie, I want to thank you so much for being here today. I'm feeling the weight of the world off my shoulders, a little less stressed. So for now, this is your Mad Scientist Jim. I am out.
Beauty Brains Braun Shante is out.
Dr. Mike Brandon following suit. I'm out.
And Jamie, the Less Stress Coach, is out.
Make sure you pick up Jamie Sussel Turner's book, Less Stress Life, on Amazon. www.lessstresscoach.com. 5 stars is always appreciated for this podcast, as well as her book. Giver's Gain for another podcast. Your Mad Scientist. I am officially, for real this time, out.